This nebula had such a resemblance to a comet in its form and brightness that I endeavored to find others that astronomers would not confuse the same nebula with comets.
The Interplanetary Podcast. The exploration of space for the benefit of all mankind. Your hosts here in London, Matthew Russell and Jamie Franklin.
Oh, yes, Charles Mercier.
Matt, you sounded a little bit like the policeman from Hello Hello there. Was that
yes,
intentional?
well, I think it probably was a little bit intentional, yes.
On this day, 290 years ago,
One of my faves.
French astronomer Charles Messier, legend.
Yeah, well, do you know, last night I went out to show my guest, Phil, Saturn and Jupiter that were just coming over the hill.
Are they? Is that a euphemism or?
Well, luckily I didn't say Uranus or anything like that.
Okay,
so I was showing
sure.
him Saturn and Jupiter. He'd never seen them through a scope before.
Did it blow his mind?
Yeah, it blew his mind,
Wow.
obviously.
There we go.
They were still, a lot of atmosphere in the way because they're quite low down at the moment. But right to the right of it was a globular cluster, one of the Messier objects. M22 is what we ended up looking at. And it just looks like a smudge, really. But
Yeah.
But it's quite nice seeing Saturn and Jupiter right next to each other at the moment.
It's a beautiful thing. And let me tell you, Matt, Charles Messier would have been very excited by a smudge back in the day, wouldn't he?
Reason why Messier is famous, particularly amongst amateur astronomers, is because the list of Messier objects is normally the kind of list that you start to sort of go through and look at through a telescope, and in particular photographs. So all those beautiful photographs you see by amateur astronomers are often Messier objects, objects that Charles Messier basically thought if you've got a small enough scope, you can look out for comets. There's no point having a massive scope looking for comets because they're so bright and big that you can find them anyway. You can often find them with binoculars, in fact. But so he went through and found all these nebulas that people might mistake as comets and wrote them all down so people didn't think that they were seeing comets, that they were actually seeing these little smudges. That's all he could see.
Okay.
Herschel went on to, with a bigger scope, catalogue far more objects, but they're not the kind of objects that could be confused with comets. So Messier was, quick to point out that his catalogue was very, very useful for that particular purpose of not getting confused with comets. So yes, a very well-known catalogue of astronomical objects. And talking of catalogues, on the same day, June the 26th, in 1932, unfortunately, was the unfortunate death of Adelaide Ames, who you might have heard of from the Shapley Ames catalogue. And she was was one of these people that surveyed the sky and created a catalogue of galaxies, in actual fact, that were brighter than 13th magnitude, and this was known as the Shapley Ames catalogue. And she could consider Cecilia Payne-Koposchkin as one of her close friends.
Wow, what a pair.
So yes,
Beautiful
it's obviously a day of cataloguers, a birth of one of the greatest and a death of one of the greatest. So cheers to Messier and Ames.
Well, that's fantastic. And Matt, would you like a bit of good news to start off the show?
Give me a bit of good news. Give me a bit of good news.
Over at NASA, they said last Wednesday that they're going to be renaming its Washington headquarters after its first black female engineer, Mary Jackson. Of course, some of you may remember from the hit film Hidden Figures. If you haven't seen it, please go and check it out. It's a wonderful thing. So that's great,
Excellent.
isn't it?
It's quite awesome. Very timely gesture, I would suggest.
Yes, completely. Very needed at the moment. Let me ask you, Matt, what's Musk up to?
NASA have been singing Musk's praises this week because the Dragon capsule has been performing ever so well, and they're very pleased with it. The solar panels, for example, are producing way more power than expected, which means it can stay at the station for a lot longer. However, it doesn't look as though Bob and Chunky are going to be stopping for a sort of long-term mission, even though they have the training to do so. it looks like they'll be brought back down on August the 2nd so that they can speed up the sort of validation process of the Dragon capsule so they can start using it for just normal operations. It's like once you get it down, check it over, yep, good to go, and then it will be part of the, fleet taking people up to the International Space Station.
Damn, they've done very well, SpaceX, haven't they? That is something to be proud of.
What's going to be extraordinary, of course, is for the last 9 years or so, we've just been used to people returning to the Russian steppes, parachuting down and that little explosion just before it hits the ground, and then bunch of rough Russian blokes rolling the capsule around and dragging the astronauts out and putting them into rubbish deck chairs and all that kind of nonsense. We're not going to see that. We're not going to see that.
Yeah, such a good point that no one talks about. Why aren't the chairs better? It's welcome back to this planet that you call home. Is a crappy old deck chair.
It is quite funny how these are obviously highly trained people. The Russians that go out and do it, but they do look like a bunch of rough builders when they're doing all that work. It's quite. I like the Russians for that.
At least give them a cushion.
But of course, this one we're going to see the return of sea returns. So the capsule dropping into the sea and being fished out by large boats. So that's either going to happen in the coast of Florida, the coast of Florida, or the Gulf of Mexico.
Floridor sounds like a Harry Potter character.
Unlike Flow Rider, that sounds like something else.
I'm pretty sure that actually is a rapper.
Yeah, Flow Rider.
Flow Rider.
Yeah. If it's not, I'm going to be Flow Rider from now on.
Relativity Space. What are we saying about them?
Well, this is quite a good one. So yes, they've just landed another a pretty major contract, but this is interesting. This is actually reasonably new, only founded in 2015 by Tim Ellis and Jordan Noon. It's an American sort of private company, but you often see pictures of their 3D printer, this enormous metal sintering machine that points lasers at powdered metal and can build very large objects. And when you see it, it is the most impressive 3D printer you've ever seen. It's just absolutely genius. But they're trying to 3D print rockets, essentially.
Beautiful. Wow.
Iridium, who are obviously an enormous communication satellite network, they have these Next satellites. And of course, 75 Next satellites have gone up on Falcon 9s. So 7 Falcon 9 launches launch 75 Next satellites up.
Got it.
They've got 6 spare ones on the ground. I think 6 of the ones that went up are actually spares anyway, or 9 or something like that, that are spares in space that they can move around and replace broken ones. But they've got 6 spare ones on the ground so that they can, at any one point, launch them and put them into a position to keep the network working at its optimal level. But what they don't want to do is just do these on single Falcon 9 launches like they put the other 75 up on 7 Falcon 9 launches. So what they want the exact size rocket to take up one Next satellite and pop it into a very distinct orbit for the cheapest amount of money possible. And of course, this happens to be the sweet spot where Relativity Space are building their rocket called the Terran 1. Now, the Terran 1, get this, is 95% 3D printed. And the company hope to be able to print these rockets in 60 days. So you press print on your computer, 60 days later you walk into the warehouse and there's a rocket being printed. And it uses 3D printed Aeon 1 engines, which are a methane liquid oxygen type engine with only 100 parts.
Would I potentially have space for one in my garage? I mean, if I press print, set it up in there.
Might be a little bit too big for your garage, but it could carry a Jamie Franklin into space quite happily. It's like 1.25 tons to low Earth orbit. So I could actually launch my Rover 75 into low Earth orbit for only...
It's not quite the Tesla, is it?
No, for only... Shut it, Jamie. Of course, it's way better than a Tesla. For only $12 million, which I think... So absolutely, this rocket is
pretty
perfect for what Iridium want. It's that because Electron, for example, is just a bit too small. It wouldn't be able to carry one of these next satellites up. They're just slightly too big. And of course, the Falcon 9 is way too big, way too big. But yeah, this Terran, which is actually like a mini Falcon 9, it's got 9 of these Aeon engines on the bottom and 1 first stage engine as well. And it's only $12 million. So by 2023, we might see the Relativity Space rocket being used for exactly that, the Terran 1. So that's, I think that's a really cool little story.
I think that's way cool. I'm with you.
And maybe Relativity Space might bring one of their 3D printed rockets over to the UK to be launched from Sutherland Spaceport.
Whoa.
That got its
Let's
planning
bloody
permission.
hope so.
It got its planning permission. It actually went through. So
that's so
looking
good.
Very, very promising indeed.
Thank God.
It's limited to something like 12 launches a year because of the waste going into the sea, basically. So if Orbex and, say, Lockheed Martin with their Electron are able to do what they say they want to do, and that's reuse them, then maybe the cadence can go up from 12 to a higher number. But that's really cool news from Sutherland Spaceport there.
Really cool news. Congratulations.
Congratulations. So well done, Orbix, for pushing that one through. And
I was worried about that. That's made me happy.
Yeah, it's good. It's good. So we'll have to we'll have to get our seats booked on the next Ryanair flight to Inverness Airport, Jamie. So let's
definitely
keep
have
an
to
eye
get
out
Chris
for
back
it.
on the line. Give us a comment.
Yeah, absolutely. So Jamie.
Yes.
I thought that this was an interesting story that came into the feed that we could have a quick tackle before I introduce you to this week's guest, who is Professor John Kiss, who is a biologist who's had lots of his little plant experiments fly up onto several different space stations.
I'm excited about this.
Absolute legend. I really enjoyed talking to him as well. He was really lovely and great ending as well. He's got a great pick for the space playlist. So listen on for John Kiss later on in the show.
Here we go.
But before we deal with that, we have to talk about black holes and neutron stars again.
Matt, I would be annoyed if you didn't.
So there's a mystery, Jamie, something that needs a little bit of clearing up, a little bit of a dispute between astronomers. And it's basically about minding the gap. So astronomers, when they get off at a tube station and they say mind the gap, it might mean something else to them. And
just a bit.
There's a kind of mass gap where neutron stars get to about 2 to 2.5 times the mass of the sun. Right. And that seems to be their absolute limit. And if you went past that, you'd expect them to collapse into black holes. But they've never found a black hole with a mass below 5 solar masses. Right. Even though they found quite a few. There seems to be this gap between 2.5 solar masses and 5 solar masses. And the question is, when a star collapses, can it form a black hole that's between 3 and 5 solar masses? Or is it just naturally that just won't happen? In other words, when a star collapses, if it collapses into a black hole, does it keep more of the mass because it's got this event horizon, and therefore the lowest mass it could have is 5 solar masses? And when a neutron star remains a neutron star, it can only get up to about 2.5 solar masses before it would have become a black hole and therefore retained more of its mass and ended up as 5 solar masses. And so is there naturally this gap, this mass gap between 2.5 and 5 solar masses? So that's a question that they've been asking. Is it a natural gap? Is there really a mass gap? Is there a dip? Is there just a little bit of a dip of black holes there? Or is there just a straightforward distribution of masses of supernova remnants that go right through the mass range, and that it's more of a measuring problem? It might be that we're just measuring. It's just that they're harder to see, and therefore we haven't seen them.
Well, I'm pleased you brought this up, Matthew, because, as you know, this is the kind of question that keeps me awake at night.
Well, this is
So
you did
I'm
mention
hoping we
this.
can put it. Hoping we can put it to bed today, so to speak.
We just talked about the Interplanetary podcast Space Song playlist, and there is a song called Cygnus X1 on there by the rock band Rush.
Oh, hell yeah.
Yeah. And yes, back in 1964, a sounding rocket, which is like one of these small rockets.
Wait, are these the lyrics?
No, these aren't the lyrics. No.
Back in '64, a sounding rocket took off from White Sands.
No, it's not. That's not the lyrics. No, the lyrics are a bit more ethereal than that. Yes, a sounding rocket took off from White Sands in New Mexico, and yes, I know you've been there, Jamie. Or
Big
have
time.
you?
I don't like talking about it.
Yeah, shut it. So, and it was carrying a Geiger counter. So as this rocket sort of goes into its spin, the Geiger counter was able to take readings. And one of the reasons why it was doing this is because X-rays are absorbed by Earth's atmosphere. And to get this sounding rocket just out of the atmosphere and spin it round, they were able to do an X-ray map of the sky. And in doing so, they revealed an extremely bright spot in X-ray that became Cygnus X1. And everyone thought, ooh, wonder what that is. And then move forward 6 years, and NASA launched the Uhuru satellite.
Oh, yeah.
Uhuru satellite. And that discovered 300 more of these X-ray sources. But Uhuru is Swahili for freedom. Did you know that?
Didn't know that.
And the reason why they chose Swahili is because the sounding rocket actually took off from an Italian facility near Mombasa. Huge. So that really sort of extended the observation of Cygnus X1. And what it actually showed was there was fluctuations in the X-ray intensity that was coming off Cygnus X1 that was varying lots of times every second. A lot of variance in this signal. Now that means, because you've got this rapid variation, that the energy must be coming from a smaller area, because the speed of light means that you can't have something, oscillating if it can't send the information from one place to another on its own surface. So they knew that this area must be as small as 100,000 kilometers. But just put that into perspective. The sun, the diameter of the sun disk is about 1.4 million kilometers across. So the sun is significantly larger than this incredibly bright X-ray source, right? So this is getting exciting. So in 1971, Luke Braze and George K. Miley from the Leiden Observatory detected radio waves coming from Cygnus X1. Wow. They were able to accurately position and pinpoint this X-ray source to the star AGK2 plus 351910.
Oh, what? You mean HDE 226868?
That's the one. Yeah, that's the one. Near Eta Cygni.
I've got that tattooed on my arm.
Only from our point of view, of course. And that is a supergiant star. So there's a supergiant star that would not be capable of putting out these X-rays. We know that stars like that don't behave like that. So they knew that the star must have a binary, a companion, that was heating up gas that it was ripping off this star and producing the radiation that was the source of this Cygnus X1 radiation. And in pop, at this point of the story, Louise Webster and Paul Merdin from the Royal Greenwich Observatory. And, and they announced that they'd actually discovered this hidden companion. And using Doppler shift, in other words, looking at this large supergiant and the change in colour from the fact that it's being pushed and pulled by its companion star, they were able to determine that this object was way more massive than a neutron star. And everyone would say, well, what's small and more massive than a neutron star? And so by 1973, everyone was now in agreement that this was drum
roll,
our first black hole.
Get in.
And of course, since then, Cygnus X1 has been extensively researched and looked at because it's a very near and very active black hole. It's almost like a mini quasar, so it's a bit like these supermassive black holes at the centers of galaxies, except a mini version. It's got jets and everything, so they're able to sort of use that to get huge insights into other black holes and quasars. So Cygnus X1 is very, very important to astronomers. So that's a little bit of the history. And of course, roll on to today, and we know hundreds of black holes, if not thousands of candidates for black holes.
Yeah, we do. We've
got the knowledge that virtually every single galactic center has a supermassive black hole at the center. And ever since LIGO and Virgo have switched on, we've been watching the merger of lots of black holes and lots of candidates for black holes as well. So we know there's lots of them out there, and we're now getting more and more ways of finding them and detecting them. Of course, they're hard to detect because they're black, which isn't helpful particularly.
Doesn't help.
So why is it that we've never seen, with all this information, we've never seen a black hole with a mass less than 5 solar masses? So why would that be? So stars don't have that mass gap, as in stars smoothly go up in mass along the spectrum. So when they collapse, you'd expect them to create neutron stars, and then when they get too heavy, you'd expect them to make black holes. So maybe the mass gap is a thing and maybe not. And there are, of course, some neutron stars that are so massive that as their spin slows down, they will collapse into black holes because they've no longer got this spinning pressure holding them up.
Sure.
So that's quite exciting. So one theory suggests that that stars, when they go supernova, that the cause collapse. But if they actually have if they have an event horizon, that actually means that they hold on to more of the mass. So you end up with this much larger 5 solar mass object. Whereas neutron stars, they don't hoover up as so much matter as they collapse, and a lot of that matter escapes as a supernova explosion. So they end up getting a maximum of 3 solar masses, and there's nothing in between. But other theorists dispute that and say there really isn't a fundamental difference between an object that can form an event horizon and one that doesn't. So the race is on to sort of prove whether there really is a mass gap. So August 2017, Jamie, we obviously had this on the podcast at the time, was the start of multi-messenger astronomy. And this is where 2 neutron stars merge together in what is now known as a killer nova.
I mean, come on.
Not just a supernova, but a killer nova. And a killer nova is pretty much the cause of all the heavy elements that we see around us, like gold and platinum and all those sort of things, are made in these ridiculous events where neutron stars smash into each other and merge into, this one seemed to merge for a fraction of a second into a giant neutron star before collapsing almost instantly into a black hole. Now, what was the mass of this new black hole? Is it in this mass gap? It certainly was. So this merged neutron star ended up being about 2.75 solar masses, which is in this kind of mass gap. Right. But it's still not caused by stellar collapse. It's caused by neutron star mergers. So it kind of still suggests that there still might be this mass gap caused by by supernova and stellar collapse, rather than just the odd black hole caused by neutron stars that have merged together. But then we had the huge neutron star that was discovered a few months ago. We had that on the show.
Oh, I remember.
Chomping into the mass gap at the bottom end so that you could get neutron stars that were heavier than people thought. But in November, a paper came out called A Non-Interacting Low-Mass Black Hole Giant Star Binary System by Todd A. Thompson. It shows pretty convincing evidence that there's this rapidly rotating giant star. Yes. And I'm not going to say its name because it's the most ridiculous one ever. Has a companion that's in the region of 2.6 to 5 solar masses. So this companion must be in this mass gap area. and the companion is dark and unseen. So it's highly likely to be a black hole. So they think that they found a black hole near that is a binary with this giant star, although some astronomers suggested it might be two low brightness stars that were a binary in itself. But Todd et al. Dispute that and say, no, that's not right. They've got the maths wrong. So they're pretty convinced there's a black hole in this mass gap size. But of course, that doesn't really solve it, because, of course, that black hole could have been formed in a kilonova as well. So the
double bluff.
So it's a double bluff, yeah. So in the very latest discovery, in a paper that came out this week called "Gravitational Waves from the Coalescence of a 23 solar mass black hole with a 2.6 solar mass compact object," right? So there's 2.6.
If you are not reading that,
then what are you doing?
I mean, seriously, you need to check your lockdown.
Yeah, R. Abbott et al. And when I say et al., there's so many people. International effort just does not cover how many people are involved in doing these kind of papers. So there was the third observing run of the LIGO-Virgo gravitational wave detectors was on August the 14th, 2019, and they spotted a merger between a huge 23 solar mass black hole. So that's a big one. That's some big bad boy out there. And something in the region of 2.6 solar mass. It merged with something like that. So that's the most uneven merger ever detected. But it also beats another record in the fact that it's either the lightest black hole or the heaviest neutron star ever discovered in a double compact object system. So,
God damn.
Yeah, the only annoying thing is the merger is so far away that even though no light was detected, which would kind of suggest it was a black hole, it's so far away they may not have seen the X-ray bursts that would have come from quark stars or neutron stars being swallowed a quark star, as we talked about a few weeks ago. When neutron stars get even more compacted, the neutron itself starts to break up into a quark soup, and so it's a little bit ambiguous about whether this is an enormous quark star or a black hole, but it does seem highly likely that it's a black hole, and from a whole bunch of maths and a whole bunch of inference, the combination of its mass ratio, the component masses, the inferred merger rate as well. So the fact that they've seen one of these events is a massive challenge for this current model that there's a mass gap and the mass distribution of compact object binaries. So,
wow.
Yeah. So
I hope it is a black hole, Matt.
Yeah, so it really might be. And it's the fact that it's one of the lightest black holes ever discovered, or the most massive neutron star discovered, kind of is cool either way. But just based on the fact that the rate density, which is like a real kind of inferred rough estimate, they reckon that they should see another of these events within the next couple of years. And in which case, it should, if they do, it will be a really strong hint of a larger population of black holes that lie in this mass gap. So that's a very, very important and interesting thing that came out. And it's, it's all based on theory. Just think about it, Jamie. In my lifetime, there was no such thing as black holes. And then suddenly it was like, no, Cygnus X1 really is a black hole. This isn't like theoretical stuff from Einstein. They actually seem to exist. Amazing, huh?
God damn. Incredible stuff. Wow. Beautiful.
So, Jamie, would you like to listen to Mr. John Kiss?
I would like nothing more.
Hey, what a great surname that is as well.
Oh, come on.
Prince wrote a song about him.
Exactly.
Écoutez.
Let's roll it.
The Interplanetary Podcast, putting the ace back into space.
I'm joined on the podcast by John Kiss, who's a professor of biology and a dean at the UNC Greensboro College of Arts and Science. Welcome to the podcast, John.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So before we start, whereabouts is Greensboro? Am I saying that right? UNC Greensboro?
You are, and it's named for a Revolutionary Army officer, Nathaniel Greene. We're in sort of central North Carolina in the Piedmont region, so past the coastal plain, but before the mountains. It's a lovely place to live.
For a Brit, that sounds like it's a nice place for some reason. It has that it kind of has that feel. So before we get into the nitty gritty about the work that you currently do and the work you've been doing, looks like all your life as well. It's how did you give us a little detail about your journey into actually getting where you are now? What was the sort of journey you took?
I guess I'll start in the beginning. So I was born in 1960, and pretty much my life is the space age. It depends. That's about when it all started. And so I was 9 years old when Neil Armstrong landed on the moon. And I remember as a little boy that had a profound effect on me. It was really quite an amazing thing. In the East Coast of the United States, we got to stay up really late. It's really cool for a 9-year-old, and saw these shadowy figures on the moon. So I've always been interested in the space program. I'm a botanist or plant biologist. And after I got my PhD degree from Rutgers University, I have to say it was largely by chance. I was looking for a postdoctoral position. And I noticed that there was this interesting one at Ohio State University that was funded by NASA. It was strictly for ground-based work. And that was in 1987. And ever since 1987, I've been involved with NASA at some level. I've been very fortunate. I've had, once I became an independent faculty member, assistant professor, I was accepted for a spaceflight project with NASA. And I've had 8 spaceflight projects in my career, which is a very fortunate thing. 7 of the 8 actually were in collaboration with NASA and the European Space Agency.
Oh, wow.
So that's been also an interesting part of the projects. That's made my life more interesting.
So yes, tell us about the very first project that you got involved in. Then what was the project?
So the first spaceflight project, I was pretty much a new assistant professor, and as all scientists, I was applying for all of these grant opportunities, and I almost didn't apply for the grant that I got. I tell grad students this story is. I think I had like 4 applications pending to the National Science Foundation, ground-based work for NASA, and there was the spaceflight project that was a cooperation between NASA and the European Space Agency, and actually the Russian Space Agency was involved. And I thought I would never have a chance. And at the last minute, I decided to apply, and it was successfully peer-reviewed. And it turns out I had the appropriate preliminary data, and the panel was very excited about my work. I was pretty upfront in that I had no spaceflight experience, and I said that if it were accepted, I would seek out mentors from primarily from France, and they liked that I was open about my limitations and found that very refreshingly honest, and they selected me, and I ended up doing the things I said I would do.
There's certainly a few lessons in there, isn't there?
Yes.
Hopefully your students take note. So yeah, what was the name of the mission, and what did you achieve anything exciting out of the results?
So the first project, it was called the BioRack project, and it was part of the shuttle to Mir missions. So Mir was the former Russian space station. And in an effort in the 1990s, in an effort to lead up to the International Space Station, I think there are 8 or 9 American astronauts that eventually stayed on Mir, and they were brought there by the space shuttle. And because of that opportunity, there was some extra room for these scientific experiments. The study we did was on how plants perceive gravity, on gravity perception. And ironically, we took away gravity by flying in low Earth orbit, and we added back gravity at various levels with an onboard centrifuge. And we kind of confirmed this model. It was called the starch statolith hypothesis by using a very unique approach.
So yeah, plants presumably don't like a lack of gravity. Is that kind of where you ended up?
I don't think
or is
that's
it more subtle
true.
than that?
Let's take a step back. I mean, gravity is such an important factor in plant development. And if you think about evolutionary history, gravity has been with us throughout evolutionary history, and it's a very pervasive and ubiquitous force. When you take gravity away, you actually could really make some very interesting observations, and we've made some other interesting discoveries. And I actually think, you could actually view gravity as a stress. We take gravity for granted, it's all around us, but some people view the microgravity condition in low Earth orbit as a stress itself. Other people view it as taking away this constant stress. So actually, plants, while they don't show directional growth in microgravity, there's conflicting data, but I believe plants actually grow better in the microgravity environment.
Oh wow, that is it. That is unusual to hear that. So, and then, of course, there's also light as well. So if you're without gravity and without light, so is light more important then, or is that something also that you?
No, you're asking an excellent question, because it actually leads to our light. You asked about our first experiments. Our latest experiments on the International Space Station were a combination of looking at the interaction between gravity and light. And gravity and light are two very important factors for plant growth and development. Once you take away gravity, like you effectively do in the microgravity environment, what happens is light effects become more pronounced and more important. And we actually, in one of our experiments, we discovered some novel light sensory mechanisms in plants that you can't really see on Earth because they're kind of hidden by the overwhelming force due to gravity.
Yeah, so I suppose that's analogous to the blind man whose hearing becomes more sensitive.
That's a really good. Thank you. I haven't thought of that, but it's actually a pretty good analogy.
Yeah. So yeah, those plants are suffering from that. Yeah.
I'll have to use that in my next public lecture.
Well, you're welcome. So I mean, you've been to the Mir space station with some of these experiments. You've done the International Space Station. Are those the two space stations that you've had experiments on, or have you?
We've also had experiments on the shuttle itself.
Okay. Yeah.
So, we've used kind of three different platforms.
Well, that must be exciting. As a scientist on those missions, do you get to go down to the launch and treated like a VIP?
Well, yeah, I've been to all the launches of my experiments. So it was in the space shuttle era, which there were some day launches and some night launches, and people asked which one was better, and they're both really cool and very different. And the last three experiments were in the post-shuttle era, so they went up on the SpaceX rocket.
Oh wow! So yeah, and you saw all three of the SpaceX launches as well.
Yeah, I've been to. I guess I've been to the 5 shuttle launches with our experiments and the 3 SpaceX launches. And with the shuttle, I went to several of the landings as well. The SpaceX capsule lands off the coast of Baja California, at least in our experiments. So they we weren't allowed to go there.
Yeah, is that actually something that's a little bit bothersome when you have, because I know that there's obviously some reason to have spacecraft that come back down to landing strips, mainly because of the experiments that they contain. Is that a problem for you, sort of plant growers?
Not for our particular type of experiment. So in general, we got two kinds of data points, or not two kinds of data from our experiments. In all but one of the experiments, we got back telemetry as the experiment was progressing, sort of real time or near real time. In addition, we got the samples back. Now they were either frozen or in some kind of fixative or preserved in some way. So for our experiments, the important thing is that things could be returned. And right now the only vehicle that returns experiments is SpaceX, because that one goes up and down. The Russians, Japanese, and Europeans have other cargo vessels, but it's a one-way trip. You bring the stuff up, you fill up your vessel with trash, and it burns up in the atmosphere.
Yeah, well, the Europeans don't even have ours anymore. So in terms of the European involvement with your experiments, how did that play out? What was the European?
Well, it's really enriched my life. So first of all, this last experiment that I did, I was the principal investigator from the NASA side, and there was a European principal investigator, Javier Medina from Madrid, Spain. But that project, we actually had collaborators in France, Netherlands, Germany, and Norway. And, I've met some fabulous people. The space, particularly life sciences community, is very small. So collaboration is the way to go. And on the International Space Station, it's mostly American and Russian. There's the Columbus module from Europe. There's a Japanese module, but essentially the facilities are shared, and there are these complex agreements between the agencies and the government. So, we used the system, a growth chamber system for plants that was developed by the European Space Agency. And there was an agreement that there would be American NASA investigators on those missions as well. So it makes sense professionally, because we have to collaborate and share our resources. I've also worked with some people from Japan on some things. It's my strongest involvement has been with Europe, but also at a personal level, it's, I have colleagues who became friends all around the world. Pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, it is really cool, isn't it? The one thing that always amazes me when I read any scientific paper these days is that the collaboration on an international scale is truly awe-inspiring. It's just like you can't read a paper where it's not involving at least like 10 nations and scientists across the world. And I just imagine, in your field, being that it's smaller, that's even more the case.
It is, yeah.
With something like the International Space Station, has it really delivered on the promise of being this kind of international laboratory? And are you worried about where its future a little bit as a result?
That's a great question. I guess I could approach it at many levels. I mean, I think at some level scientists have been disappointed with the International Space Station. I think part of the problem is in many ways it's a wonderful, complex project. It does really foster cooperation between America and Russia, which is important in many levels, and other countries. But I think one of the things that they found was there's so much crew time that's needed just to maintain a complex orbital station that scientists want time for science, and there's less time than we had originally thought. Right now, I think the life of the space station, I don't know the exact status, but I think it's been extended to 2026. The next thing I'm kind of focused on is kind of Moon and Mars experiments. And I actually think that the space station could help us develop Moon and Mars experiments.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, talking of moon experiments, did you look on a little bit envious of the Chinese when they were growing stuff on the moon? Because I thought that was a news story that went a little bit under the radar, really. I thought it was monumental, but what did you think? What did you think of the...
Well, I think what is it, the
Chang'e 4, I think, is it? Yeah.
Yeah. I really admire the Chinese for just the whole concept of going on the far side of the moon and their clever approach for communications. I think it was pretty cool. By the way, I also admire other robotic landers, like the Israeli one, which didn't work out, but that was done on really dirt cheap. It almost works out.
Yeah, I know. When it was at the beginning of the year, it had been my mission to watch, and it was tantalizingly close, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
In terms of the scientific output, well, in terms of plant biology of the Chang lander, I was a little bit disappointed, and I haven't seen all the details. So they had some plants that germinated, but it was unclear to me whether they really germinated on the moon or on the way there. And then I guess their environmental system failed, and the plants were frozen. So, I mean, that was more like a and again, I really admire what they're doing, but it was more a technology demonstration rather than I would have liked, maybe that's all they could have done at that point, but I guess I would have liked to have seen a more robust experiment.
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah. I mean, I think that's maybe the difference between you and me, isn't it? I'm the space nerd who just likes to see the technology, and you're the scientist who actually wants to see some genuine output.
I'm a space nerd too, the whole way that they developed that far out satellite to be able to communicate with the far side. I think they've set themselves up and they set the stage for some really important work. But no, I congratulate them. And what I'm saying is just, it's not meant to be super critical. It's just that in some places it was sold as like this scientific experiment, and I don't see it that way. I think it was an important technology demonstration.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's I think that's a very good way of putting it. I mean, when it comes to obviously this being able to, and I'm assuming this is the thrust of your work, is to kind of work out how we can grow biological systems beyond the Earth. I'm right in saying that.
Yeah, well, that's also an excellent question. So, I mean, the reason NASA and the European Space Agency funds this, I would call what I do very basic plant biology. Some people call it fundamental plant biology. I'm interested in cellular mechanisms of gravity and light perception. Sounds a bit arcane, but really what that does is if we understand all these mechanisms, it'll allow us to eventually develop plants for bioregenerative life support, mainly for producing food, and oxygen, of course, is a byproduct. And this really becomes it's not terribly important in low Earth orbit because it's not that far away. But if you go to Mars, it's the minimum mission is like 3 years. So it's either like pack all your food for 3 years, or there are various scenarios, but ultimately you're going to need to grow plants on Mars. And that's kind of a goal. But again, to be clear, there are some people who sort of do more direct horticultural experiments of developing species, cultivars for optimization in space. I don't do that. I look at the basic mechanisms. I'm very interested in that.
Yeah, so your work really also could, I guess, feed back into just general plant growth on planet Earth as well. You know,
it does, because I mean, I think again, if you view gravity as changing the stress parameters, whether it's positive or negative, if you think about what's happening on Earth, there's we have a growing population. We have desertification around the planet. So it's just getting more stressful for plants. And if we understand some of the parameters that I'm interested in, some of the basic mechanisms, it could help us in perhaps designing plants to grow in stressful environments on Earth.
Yeah, no,
So there's Earth applications.
Yeah, I mean,
well.
I guess with global warming as well, it's presumably it's a key technology in that as well. So I've got a question: would you have been a good person to go to the cinema or a bad person to go to the cinema with when The Martian was out and he was growing potatoes?
Well, I love The Martian. I mean, I'm a big fan of Matt Damon, and the movie is, it's kind of scientifically, it's not very accurate, but I don't really care. I mean, it was just, it was a very well written. And I'll tell you the part I like about it is most people, and I've shown this video clip in seminars. So this probably most people didn't even notice this part is, if you recall the part when he's sitting there, he's like snacking and recording stuff, and he's figuring out that he's in really bad shape, that, I gotta, it's going to take him 600 days. I have 200 days of food. And, it sounds pretty grim. And then he lifts up a manual. I don't have a manual here. I'm trying to. My manual. And he goes, but I am a botanist and I could figure this out. That alone made the whole movie worth it, because botanists are usually portrayed as, maybe justly so, as a kind of a bunch of nerds and really not, very exciting people. So the genre of the botanist as this adventurer and hero warmed my heart. So that alone was worth it.
Yeah,
for me. But it was a fun movie.
It's funny. I grew up with a botanist that was on television called David Bellamy, and he made botany fun in this country. I don't know if you've.
That's good.
He had a very funny voice. I don't know whether he became controversial. I don't know. Can't remember what happened to him, but he certainly made botany fun. So maybe the British.
Do you recall that scene?
No, absolutely, yeah. No, I'd actually read the book, and it's that bit's in the book as well, and it was well, I think it was in the book. I don't remember it not being.
The book is better because there are sort of more crises than the film. The film was pretty good, but I think they cut out 2/3 of the crises.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Particularly, the one about the dust storm and things like that. Yeah, that was. Yeah. It was like, yeah. Which I was quite glad. I was thinking, this is going to be another hour of dust storms if it's going to go into that. But yeah, I films and books. So what are the big challenges? So if I was to go on a big deep space mission and I was trying to have a greenhouse on a spacecraft, what would be the big challenges there, or the big challenges with a colony on Mars or on the Moon?
Yeah, that's also a very interesting issue and question. So if you take a step back, and there's a lot of interesting books on how we could go to Mars direct, or sending spacecraft, and I actually always think that good science fiction makes some wonderful predictions. And the thing that they mostly ignore, and even in the public mind, it's sort of like, well, we had this Saturn V, which was this gigantic rocket, so you need a really big rocket. And, that has a lot of technological challenges, and maybe we have something pretty close to it. the SpaceX Heavy, so that big rocket. But one of the things that's not very well understood for planets is radiation effects. So even going to Mars, we're in deep space. We're out of the protection of the Earth's radiation belts, atmosphere. The International Space Station has more radiation than Earth, but it's still kind of shielded. But once you get into deep space, there are all sorts of large particles and a lot more dangers in terms of radiation. And we could go to Mars, and even the astronaut, everyone could get there, and they could be jellyfish because their brains have been bombarded with these particles. So there's some interest, obviously, NASA in radiation effects on humans or animal systems, but plants have been kind of largely ignored, even by the radiation program. So that is just something that is not very well understood. The other thing about radiation effects is so Mars, pretty much the surface of Mars probably has too much radiation for humans to survive. So some of the interesting kind of science fiction, they actually view that most of the astronauts who will be going to Mars, if they set up a colony, will be kind of living underground to protect themselves from radiation. And even for the light, there's probably enough light to grow plants, but if you grow them underground, you could use fiber optics to pipe them in underground. So I think the radiation thing is a huge question. The other question, and this is one I've explored in our latest experiments, is what I call reduced or fractional gravity. So without getting into too much physics, which is a dangerous thing for me, is, essentially when astronauts, if you're in low Earth orbit, essentially there's microgravity or zero gravity or weightlessness. If you go to the moon or Mars, gravity is attraction between two objects. So on the moon, you weigh 1/6 what you do on Earth. That's why if you look at those Apollo pictures, those guys are hopping around the surface of the moon with a 100-kilogram backpack. So try doing that on Earth. It'd be pretty hard. And Mars is a bigger planet, so there's 3/8 G. And it's unclear. We actually know a lot about plants growing in microgravity, but we don't know very much about reduced gravity. And I've done some work in that area where we get on the International Space Station with centrifuges. You could simulate the Moon-Mars levels of gravity. I think we need to know more about that.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? You have to go to a place where you've got virtually no gravity and put some gravity back in with centrifuges. Yeah, that is interesting. Yeah. I mean, it does. I mean, you talk to anyone about these long distance space trips, and it seems that radiation is the killer, isn't it? And literally and in terms of the scientific knowledge. So, what would be as if you were a betting man, what would you say the effect of radiation would be on plants?
Probably pretty lethal and deleterious. So I think the key is finding ways to mitigate it and shield against it. I mean, the thing about that is, there are ways to do it, like with thick lead shields, but that's problematic. So I think some of it might be a material sciences question of what kinds of shielding we could get. I'll tell you, the good news is, at least in our data on the parameters we studied in terms of plant growth and development, the moon level of gravity is very different than plants would behave differently at moon levels of gravity compared to Earth. But interestingly, the Mars level, the 3/8 G, is almost as good as the 1 G on Earth. So again, this is it's based on, I try to be careful, based on the parameters we studied. The gravity per se should not be a problem of growing plants on Mars, which is a pretty exciting result. There's a few other studies on this, but not very much known. It also extends to human physiology because, extended time in microgravity is not really good for muscle mass and bone mass. And astronauts essentially suffer from accelerated osteoporosis. But the question is, what about on the moon? What about on Mars?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's quite a few health problems. The eye problem as well as is there. So presumably, in the same way that they're spotting all these human health problems, presumably the biological, particularly the plant aspects of this, is lagging behind somewhat because of just the amount of money spent on the research.
I would say so. Yeah, and again, I think when it's a kind of an interesting thing. NASA is fundamentally an engineering organization. So it's like, build that big rocket, and that's sort of their, and I don't mean this to be hypercritical. It's just the way it has been. I mean, there are people interested in biology, but biology is just historically has been much less important. I mean, the main biological aspects they're interested in is crew health and mitigation of some of the factors. But again, I think plants are going to be part of the story here. And I've been fortunate. I've had pretty good levels of funding from NASA, but they don't really spend enough on the plants. But I'm biased.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's definitely something that I've been critical myself about things like the SpaceX and the Elon Musk. We're going to Mars, and like Musk is in particularly bad for it as well. He literally no consideration for the biological mass that has to go to Mars to actually make it work.
I agree. I mean, I admire Musk because of the whole what he's done with SpaceX and its kind of visionary approach. But you're absolutely right. I say the same thing as, I mean, I guess, that's probably not his job, is to focus on other factors going. I mean, he's focused on that big rocket, and that's important. But if we have the big rocket again, we could end up there and we could be jellyfish, and that's not going to. People will be in bad shape physically and mentally, and that's not going to work.
Yeah. So if you were to design the perfect experiment now, if NASA said, right, we're going to give you an unlimited budget next year, what would you go off and do? What experiment would you absolutely love to run right now? Because I've got unlimited money, by the way. So
yeah. Well, so that's an interesting question. So I mean, I would try to find a way to combine these two factors, so the reduced gravity levels and the radiation, because right now we have separate experiments. There's a small group that have done these reduced or fractional gravity experiments, and there's a small group that's done radiation experiments. What they do is they simulate different kinds of radiation. They do it at Brookhaven National Lab is one place. NASA also has this Antarctic balloon program, which these balloons leave from Antarctica, and they reach an altitude where it's pretty. The temperature is like Mars, and there are higher radiation effects, but not Martian levels. So I think if we could combine those two things, which isn't an easy thing to do, it would require some new expensive instrumentation for the International Space Station. I think we could make some progress on that. We have again some glimpse of the two separate parameters, but how these parameters interact could really have a very profound effect.
Yeah, I mean, it just the way you've painted it makes me realise, obviously, you know, sort of heading out to Mars now and thinking you could have plants growing on like a spacecraft on the way there is unthinkable, isn't it? Because we just don't know what the effect in that environment would be.
Well, I think you could grow some plants. It's just, you know, it's probably not going to be enough for bioregenerative purposes. And then when you get to Mars, right now there isn't a really great plan for. I mean, some people are thinking about this. I have some colleagues, some NASA scientists who really work on these things more directly, but there really isn't a good plan from what I could tell. So if we had the Elon Musk produces the rocket tomorrow, I don't know.
So I'm going to ask you just a couple more questions, and I'll let you go.
Sure.
I'm sure you're a super busy man. If you were to bring back someone from the past, a dead person, if you to bring them back, a hero of yours that you would like to show your work to, who would it be? Is there someone specifically that you kind of look up to as a hero in your field, or maybe not even in your field? I don't know.
Well, this one might sound like a strange one. Charles Darwin.
So doesn't sound that strange.
Well, so Darwin, you know, he was an incredible guy. Of course, he's known for evolution, but one of his books, he had 2 botanical books. One of the books, which I love, is called The Power of Movement in Plants. It's one of his lesser known books. And he described all these very detailed observations about plant behavior toward gravity and light. And he made a very interesting prediction that was actually proved on, it wasn't proved until a space shuttle experiment, which is quite amazing. So there's I didn't talk about this. So there's a phenomenon in plants called Circa Mutation. And Darwin was obsessed with Circa Mutation. He kind of overstated it. He thought Circa Mutation was responsible for almost everything. But basically, when a plant grows, even if it grows, quote, straight, it never really grows straight. It grows kind of around a helical axis. I know your listeners can't see my finger there, but so
they'll get it.
Yeah. But this happens in plant organs. I mean, it's in some things it's very obvious, like things like morning glory or grapes. There's a Circa Mutation, and they'll wrap around, you know, a fence or a post or something. But there's a big debate as to whether Circa Mutation is an endogenous feature of plants, just built in, or is it a gravity-dependent phenomenon? And I think this was an early experiment in the 1990s. Darwin thought it was an endogenous phenomenon, and other people thought, no, it's dependent on gravity. So they did some experiments on the space shuttle, and Darwin was right. So I'd love to talk to him about his observations about plant gravity and light sensing.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but that's a fantastic insight. Yeah, I mean, obviously, I didn't know anything about that side of Darwin. I mean, obviously, I knew he did all those botanical voyages on the Beagle and things like that. But yeah, what a great scientist, basically.
The nice thing for me is, you know, most of the, you know, there's some really great classical botanical texts in the late 90s. Most of them are in German, but of course, Power of Movement in Plants is in English. So I encourage you to go out and get a copy and immediately devour it. Yep. So it's my bookshelf.
Do you know what? I think I might. It might be something that both myself and my wife can enjoy, because she likes like a true English person. She's very much into gardening, which is
right.
which I know isn't such a bigger hobby in elsewhere. I understand that the British are a little bit obsessed with our gardens. But what about yourself? Do you keep yourself a nice garden in North Carolina?
Do me?
Yeah.
No, I'm well, we have some plants, but I'm better growing them in space than on the ground. I usually kill them. My wife is much better. Gardening is a great thing though, because you can really make there's all sorts like this, this Circa Mutation. I mean, you could actually really see it in some of the plants, The other funny story about that is, so sunflowers are really good at Circa Mutation. Even you could just do an experiment and grow the little seedlings, and if you look every half hour, you'll see them moving. The funniest thing is cut tulips also Circa Mutate, and I always think about these artists struggling with alcoholism and stuff, doing these still lifes, and the plants really were moving. That's maybe a terrible thing to say, but you could, you could study Circa Mutation with cut tulips, or it's present in every plant, but some plant groups it's more obvious, and like the sunflower seedlings are phenomenal, and that's what they used actually on one of the space experiments.
Yeah. Well, there was a craze, wasn't there, a few years ago of dancing sunflowers that did that thing to music. So that was obviously where it's from. Circa Mutation. I shall try and remember the phrase. That's brilliant. I've got one last question that you may or may not be able to answer because I've sprung this on you. Is the we have a space songs playlist. Is there a particular space-related song that you ever sort of listen to, or are you a musical person?
I have a good one. Well. It's from. I'm a big fan of theater, so it's from Wicked, Defying Gravity.
Oh, okay, brilliant. Yeah, well, we haven't got.
Yeah, I think at the end of Act 1, in the shuttle era, they had this. They did this big thing about the wake up songs for the crew, and they try to, like if some crew members from Texas, they'd have some Texas song but they have played Defying Gravity a couple of times. The crew tells me they're always awake by the time they play the song. But I like that one a lot. That was an easy one.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant because it's not on the list, and you're the first person to come up with it. So that's awesome. Well, thank you very much for the time. There's some really cool things in there that I am going to go out and get that Darwin book as well.
Well, thank you for your interest. I think the space program's a wonderful thing in many ways. There's always this debate of it's been with NASA certainly from the beginning, but why should we waste this money on space when we have problems on Earth? Well, we're always going to have problems on Earth. And I really do think space is part of our exploration. And it may sound a bit corny, but our human destiny. I think there's a real intrinsic desire to know more about what's beyond us. And, there's certainly many other topics like life on other planets. And I'm sure that some of our other planets in the solar system, they probably currently have life. I think there's something in the seas of Europa, for instance. And this is, I have obviously no evidence, but I think that's also an important question is we're pretty sure there's life out there, but we don't know it for sure. So I've been very fortunate because I have my personal interest, and it stemmed from my childhood. And I've been fortunate that I've been able to actually contribute in a small way to some of these things.
The Interplanetary Podcast is alive!
There you go, Jamie. What a lovely chat.
Fan-dabby-dozer. Incredible stuff. Lovely guy. Brilliant.
Awesome.
Another banger. And great song choice.
Yeah, great song choice and great choice of scientists to bring back. Jamie.
Yes.
If people have enjoyed the Interplanetary Podcast, what do you think? Yeah. What do you think they should do?
There is one area of the internet that you need to be if you're cool, and that's www.interplanetary.org.uk. You'll find everything there. We bang on about it every week, but we'd love to thank our patrons because you make our world go round. Even if some of you are black holes, you don't suck us in and kill us.
Don't forget you can now quickly pop over to YouTube if you want to stick it on your telly. Jamie, what are you doing this weekend?
I've got some DIY to do at my house. I'm putting some wooden flooring down in the lounge and the hallway. So very exciting. What about yourself, Matt?
I do have DIY to do, but I've also got lots of college work to do. I might do some painting in the hall. I think I've got lots of white walls to be painted, but I think
Beautiful.
I've got my telescope out now, so I might be spending a few late nights.
I was going to say,
get
yourself outside.
Oh, I have to shout out to Justin Young, our one of our Uber patrons.
Oh, yes.
He posted some of his astrophotography that he's been doing, and it's absolutely stunning. I'm super jealous. I'm jealous of his telescope.
Yeah, it's pretty damn good. Justin, you're a ledge. Keep sending them.
Yeah, so from Tasmania as well. That's cool, isn't it? So
oh wow, Tassie.
Tasman. So that's it, Jamie. This is nice and easy.
That's it. We've done a podcast.
So see you next week for more space fun and games.
Bye.